Hi everyone, in today's lore video I'm going to check out the war gear of the Catachan Jungle Fighters. This is in follow-up to two other videos I did looking at the equipment of the Cadians in the Death Corps of Krieg. For this I'll draw on my experience as a former rifleman in the Australian Army to see how realistic their kit is. Now just like the previous videos, the term realistic needs to be considered in light of this being a fictional universe. However, running this through a realism lens does allow us to understand what it would be like for a Catachan to fight in the 41st millennium. Right, so let's first start by kicking off and exploring some wider factors that will impact the Catachans and the ability to operate in the jungle. The Catachans obviously born onto a jungle death world, and this means their ability to operate in a highly inhospitable environment of the jungle is naturally enhanced. I had the pleasure of training in the jungle several times during my service, and to use a very rude word, it was an absolutely shit experience. Depending on the season, it would be either constantly wet and humid or dry and suffocating. You are constantly wet, either from rain, wet underfoot, or from constant sweating, often made worse by thick mud that sticks to everything. This constant wet plays havoc on your skin, with feet of course having a tough time, with blisters forming, and then chafing developing along contact points with your uniform, pack, belts and harnesses. A condition called prickly heat would also occur where your sweat pores become clogged and causing micro-stabbing sensations running along your body, which is very unpleasant, with only exfoliation being a possible remedy. All in all, it's a crap experience made worse by the fact that all your kit is equally as wet, meaning anything not waterproofed is soggy, and equipment and weapons need constant maintenance and oiling to prevent rust forming. Now I say all this having grown up in the luxury of a Western country, with my childhood spent in the suburbs of Sydney, Australia. A Catachan recruit, however, of course has grown up with this all their life and probably views significant parts of what I just mentioned as pure normality. Now a key element to also be mentioned of the Catachans is their physical bulk. With child and infant mortality quite high, on the Catachan death world, those that survive and serve in the Catachan regiments will probably be quite physically massive. Catachans are sometimes referred to as baby ogrims, and their physical bulk will obviously be helpful when engaging in close quarter fighting, aka melee, possibly overpowering their opponent, but more relating to their kit is they can comfortably carry more of it. A principle of soldiering is that every soldier is to carry the same as any other. What I'm alluding to here is that regardless of a soldier's physical size, they're expected to carry what is required of them. At 70 kilos or 154 pounds, I had to carry as much equipment as a bloke who had 100 kilos or 220 pounds. The standard load a rifleman was to carry was 28 kilos at a minimum, and this included food, water, ammunition, your weapon, spare clothes, sleeping kit, first aid kit, entrenching tools, night vision equipment, and so on. This is carried in a rucksack and webbing being comprised of a belt, harness and pouches. And now of course any additional equipment or weapons such as body armour, a radio, light or medium machine guns, light or medium anti-tank weapons or anti-personnel weapons like claymores had to be carried in addition to this 28 kilos. Throughout my service I often was assigned the minimi, also known as a saw, but a light support weapon. Weighing 7 kilos, it was over double the weight of the Ostire and required you to also carry a spare barrel and of course ammunition, with our standard load was 800 rounds of 5.56. This was bloody hard work and made effectively patrolling, watching your surroundings for signs of the enemy, really hard, given you're constantly fighting sore shoulders or knees and ankles that always felt a bit wobbly. Now Catachan friends, being baby ogrims, would cope a lot better than I would, given their enormous size. Now truly pivoting to their kit, the Catachans are carrying minimal equipment with only some grenades and pouches on some of the miniatures. Some also have rucksacks, but broadly speaking, they've got minimal equipment. Clearly the Catachan miniatures are ancient and over 20 years old now, designed with a different mindset, but fighting on the battlefield with no water bottles or pouches to carry additional equipment would be very challenging. Sure, a lasgun magazine can fire 150 rounds, which is equivalent to 5 30 rounds of modern ammunition, but to go about it without first aid kits, rations, or simply their famous Catachan Fang, the 20-inch fighting knife they all have, looks a bit strange. In defence of this, however, and tying back to what I spoke about with the Catachans being natives of a jungle environment, They may be able to simply survive off the land, eating local flora and fauna, and finding local water sources. But to go into battle with just trousers, a vest and a bandana is a bit silly. Also, the lack of sleeping equipment is a bit of a concern, given if anybody's been in the jungle and tried sleeping just on the ground, will wake up covered in all types of bites and stings. Now, looking at the uniform, unfortunately it also too is unplausible. Now, bandana is obviously inspired by our friend Rambo, however having a red one is frankly ridiculous. It's made ridiculous from a camouflage and concealment point of view, and anybody with the most basic grasp of tactical principles knows that a bright colour is to be avoided, so for our supposed masters of jungle warfare, wearing this is very silly. What isn't silly about wearing a bandana, however, is that it'll soak up all the sweat that comes off your head and forehead from the previously mentioned hot and humid environment, meaning you're going to be constantly sweating. Now onto their vests, again taking inspiration from Rambo, and wearing a vest in the jungle is frankly ridiculous. Sure, the Catachans are natives to a jungle environment, but the jungle is all full of all types of plants and vines that are covered in sharp barbs, needles and spikes that will shred your skin. When I trained in the jungle, a particular vine was nicknamed Wait a While, which were covered in hooks that would literally tear clothing and skin. This bastard of a thing would get caught up on your equipment, weapon, boots, and sometimes even your face, causing you to wait a while, whilst you untangled yourself. On countless occasions, I got wrapped up in the stuff, and after 2 weeks of training in the jungle, my hands were completely covered in cuts. Mercifully, the rest of my body was protected by my long sleeve uniform, so the idea that the Catachans would go about the jungle in just a vest is a bit silly. Sure, this is the 41st millennium, and Catachans are baby Ograms, however I'm sure they want to avoid their skin being all cut up, leading to discomfort and even possibly infection. Another issue with wearing just a vest ties back to the red bandana, being that it breaks the principles of camo concealment, given skin typically stands out in a jungle environment. Of course, they could smear camouflage paint onto their arms, however to truly cover your face, neck, arms and hands would require multiple tins of camo paint stuffed into the few pouches that they've got in their webbing. Right, lastly, the weapons. Like all previous videos, I won't comment on the realism of a lasgun, however their blades can be explored a bit more. As said earlier, the Catachan fang measures 20 inches long, and to give perspective, the M9 bayonet I use is only 7 inches long, so the fang is obviously almost 3 times as long as that. This makes it a mini sword and would be obviously very helpful in close quarter fighting, however it would be impractical to carry on your belt, getting in the way when you knelt or sat down. Now the use of the fang would be for close quarter fighting, bushcraft, and also to kill any creepy crawlies in the jungle. Along with the hot, humid, muddy conditions, this is made worse by all types of insects, with the most annoying being simply mosquitoes and also leeches. Mosquito bites become very itchy, and leeches, once attached, can only be removed with either salt, a cigarette lighter or matches. On a jungle death world, these will be probably the least of your worries, with equipment possibly much bigger and way more dangerous. The Catachans will know what to look out for, and use their Catachan fangs to dispatch any creepy crawlers that get a bit too close. As to the rest of the favourite war gear, the flamer is always popular, and I never actually used a flamer obviously, and they aren't used by modern militaries, however they're used extensively in the Second World War and the Vietnam War. As a close range terror weapon, these would be terribly effective, hitting anybody in the burst range, but depending on the density of the jungle being operated in, a flamer may actually be ineffective. In the thickest of jungles, visibility is often sometimes only a few meters, and moving through the jungle at a slow pace. During my training, I would sometimes only cover a kilometre in a day, moving very slowly and carefully through the undergrowth. If a flamer could be brought to bear on the enemy, it would actually act as a beacon to other enemy soldiers. Whilst they may struggle to locate you, using only the sound of gunfire or shouting to identify an approximate location, a flamer's heat, light and smoke could act as an accurate beacon, allowing them to apply more effective fire or simply rush you and get close and personal. Alright, so there you have it, how realistic the war gear of the Catachan Jungle Fighters is. Clearly not realistic in the sense of not carrying much equipment at all, and they also are modelled off Rambo. But again, this is a fictional universe where uniforms of all types of colours are probably less important as far as camouflage is concerned. Just look at the Blood Angels or Ultramarines in bright red and bright blue. So what do you think of this topic? And if you've trained in the jungle in the military, I'd love to hear from you. Just put them in the comments and let's see how we go. So yep, if you've enjoyed this and want to support me, you can do so with a like, comment, or by subscribing, joining my Patreon platoon, or simply watching any of my other YouTube videos. A massive thanks to my current supporters. To keep your bayonet sharp, last gun oiled, faith for the Emperor strong, Patreon platoon, sound off. Tank Commander Glenn, Tank Commander Watchdog Van Etten, Tank Commander Mitchell, Colour Sergeant DuPont, Sergeants Adal, the Colonel Merrill, Veteran Gibson, Hall, Lundeen, Guardsman Beard, Coquelin, Flint, Hills, Malik, Nitton, Nguyen, Smith, Tom, Tompkin, Conscript England, Gilliam, Goodwin.